is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliette Mann. Our top stories. The United States promises to cut carbon emissions faster, putting pressure on other countries as world leaders begin a climate summit.
The United States isn't waiting. We are resolving to take action.
Our other headlines: Jaguar Land Rover slams on the brakes, the latest car company to pause production amid a global shortage of semiconductor chips.
India sees the world's highest daily number of new coronavirus cases, with hospitals overwhelmed and oxygen running out.
And the German parliament approves a law giving Chancellor Angela Merkel more powers to fight coronavirus. The United States has vowed to cut its carbon emissions by at least half by the end of this decade. Speaking at a two-day virtual summit hosted by Washington, President Joe Biden warned that all countries, but particularly the world's largest economies, must do more to confront the climate crisis. The summit, which coincides with Earth Day, also saw European leaders and China's Xi Jinping pledge ambitious targets.
Well, in a moment, our correspondent Tony Waterman in Brussels for European reaction. First, let's go to John Terrett, who's in New York. John, is this the clearest signal yet that this US administration is prioritising the climate crisis?
Well, I think you can read it like that, Jamie and Juliette. This is certainly a big change in tone from the previous administration, the Trump administration, in which I think there were a lot of climate change deniers. And this administration, under President Biden, the exact opposite of that. Now, Biden made big headlines today when he promised to try to cut American emissions by 52%. That's more than half by the decade's end, year 2030. Now, around the horseshoe table at this virtual event that can be seen online right around the world, and which features 40 or so world leaders, you can see that the climate czar John Kerry is present, also the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and just in the last few minutes, Janet Yellen, who is the Treasury Secretary, she's also just spoken. Biden said that this is the decisive decade if we are to keep global warming down to 1.5%. And he said we have to take action, all of us. Here's more of what he had to say.
Scientists tell us that this is the decisive decade. This is the decade we must make decisions that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. We must try to keep the Earth's temperature and to an increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. You know, the world beyond 1.5 degrees means more frequent and intense fires, floods, droughts, heat waves, and hurricanes, tearing through communities, ripping away lives and livelihoods.
Now, I will tell you, despite this, Biden has equal critics here at home in the United States. This is a fossil fuel economy, of course. Remember the stance taken by President Trump just a few months ago, and people here are very worried about what will happen to the U.S. economy if all of these measures he's proposing and others are put into place. He did say this is the first step on a road we will all travel. And then he cited COP26 coming up in Glasgow in November, the big UN event that was postponed for a year from last November. Juliette?
Let's talk about another economy, another fossil fuel economy, China. Because China and the US, they've agreed to work closer together on this, haven't they? Despite tensions growing elsewhere. Tell us more.
Well, I think those tensions between Beijing and Washington are absolutely palpable at the moment. And I think it plays into this summit a little bit as well, because we know that President Xi didn't agree to do it until within the last 24 hours. And certainly tensions between the two countries over various issues have been cited for that reason. Now, John Kerry, the climate czar, went to Shanghai last weekend. And at that conference, it was decided that China and the US would cooperate on the issue of climate change. And that pleased scientists, because they said that if the two countries did not cooperate, then the effect of trying to combat climate change was effectively dead in the water. Now, today, he was the first speaker after the Secretary General of the United Nations. President Xi's remarks concentrated on emissions and also coal. Take a listen.
China has committed to move from carbon peak to carbon neutrality in a much shorter time span than what might take many developed countries. And that requires extraordinarily hard efforts from China. Support is being given to encourage peaking pioneers from localities, sectors, and companies. We will strictly control coal-fired power generation projects. We will strictly limit the increase in coal consumption over the 14th five-year plan period and phase it down in the 15th five-year plan period.
And I believe those remarks about coal power stations and emissions are relatively new. Now, you can follow this summit both today, Thursday, and on Friday when it continues. It's a two-day event marking Earth Day. You can do that online. I will tell you, Juliet, coverage of this event very limited on American cable news channels.
Interesting. John Terrett in New York, thank you.
OK, let's bring in our correspondent, Tony Waterman, watching events for us in Brussels. Tony, EU leaders reached agreement of sorts on a climate law on Wednesday. Did they have much more to add at this summit?
Well, Jamie, not in terms of these hard, tangible new commitments. I mean, yesterday's agreement on this climate law, which would enshrine into law this commitment to slash greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and also become completely climate neutral by 2050. That was a hard-fought battle, and all of these EU leaders today were showing that off as sort of this trophy to these other global leaders. But all of them, Draghi, Merkel, Macron, all saying that more needs to be done if they are going to be able to keep the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius as laid out in the Paris Agreement. Italy's Mario Draghi really pointed and highlighted the bloc's $900 billion COVID-19 recovery fund. This puts aside a lot of money. About a third of it is going to be earmarked for green initiatives. And in Italy, he said they're going to use that to retrofit buildings to make them more environmentally friendly, to help build out high-speed rail and other forms of low-carbon transportation. And Europe really sees this recovery fund as its springboard into this green future. It's going to be the driver of growth, the driver of jobs in the future, perhaps some very well-paying jobs in the future. But another thing that they talked about was the need to really price carbon properly. There is a cap-and-trade system in place in Europe at the moment. It's limited to certain sectors like cement and power and aviation. There's been talk about trying to expand that out to other sectors and perhaps also limiting the number of these permits so that the prices would get driven up, incentivizing companies to go ahead and slash their carbon emissions. But all of these leaders today very much aware that this is an ongoing issue that is going to require constant attention and constant revisions to their commitments, but ultimately something that they also see as an opportunity. Take a listen.
This is a Herculean task because this is nothing short of a complete transformation, a complete change of the way we do business, the way we work.
It's vital for all of us to show that this is not all about some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging, or however you want to put it. I'm not wrong with bunny hugging, but you know what I'm driving at, friends and colleagues. This is about growth and jobs.
Tony, all this comes as scientists have calculated that the year 2020 was Europe's hottest year on record.
Yeah, you're right, Jamie. The hottest year on record across all seasons, although the winter of last year was particularly warm. The average temperature, these scientists said last year, was 0.4 degrees Celsius higher than the next 5 warmest years. All of these years, though, coming in just the past decade. So you can see really this rapid rise and consistent rise in temperatures. And besides what have become these very yearly events of extreme weather, things like storms and flooding and drought and these fires that have been taking place, besides that happening, there's now growing concern on how climate change is going to impact things like geopolitics or mass migration or conflict. When you have fires or flooding wiping out entire communities, that means that you have more people competing for what is becoming more scarcer and scarcer set of resources, and it could be driving people to different parts of the world and increasing conflict between populations. And this is something that they're calling it the multiplier effect, and it's becoming something that is taking really center stage. So all of these issues very, very much intertwined when it comes to tackling climate change.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
Joanna Lewis is Associate Professor and Director of Science, Technology and International Affairs at Georgetown University. Thanks ever so much for joining us. So we've been hearing how climate change is very much a key focus for US President Joe Biden. Why is this summit, this climate summit that's taking place, why do you think it's so important?
Well, this is really, the first time President Biden and the entire U.S. administration are on the global stage after the United States announced it would rejoin the Paris Agreement. And so, of course, the big news today are the updated U.S. climate commitments that have been announced. A new target of 50 to 52% by 2030, but below 2005 levels, as well as a new plan for international climate finance and a variety of other, new global partnerships. So I think this is really important because not only has, President Biden said that they've rejoined the agreement, but they've really backed this up with some specific new, pledges and put some money behind it as well.
What about the potential for cooperation between China and the United States in particular?
Well, Secretary Kerry, of course, went to China over the weekend to try to make sure everything was ready for the summit. And I think there was a really constructive joint announcement that came out of that meeting that really sets the stage for a new era of U.S.-China cooperation in the coming months and years. And I think it will be so crucial for China and the United States to continue to work together, both in the lead up to COP26 and beyond, because right now China's targets that they put forward, while ambitious, just are not sufficient to get us to 1.5 degrees. And there really is much more that needs to be done.
You mentioned COP26 coming up in Glasgow, and the UK is very keen to show green credentials. Experts say their goals are achievable. So do you think the UK is setting their bar too low?
Well, I think that this is really about, all countries sort of gradually ratcheting up ambition and in doing so, encouraging other countries to do more. I think the UK has put forward some very ambitious targets and, of course, is playing a really key leadership role in mobilizing global action, both in the run up to COP26 as well as through the G7 and other key global summits this year. So I think we will see a lot of movement over the next few months. I think that many countries have more to put on the table. And hopefully by the time we get to COP26 in November, we will see several new commitments from many of the largest economies coming forward before then.
You say that there are some countries who've got more to put on the table. Go on, name names. Which countries do you think need to step it up?
Well, as I said earlier, I do think China has more, and I think there's a lot of signals in the U.S.-China joint statement where China is saying they recognize the Paris targets. They understand the importance of really getting to a below 2-degree goal. And all the modeling shows us that the current targets that China has put on the table don't get us to this below 2 degrees. So I think we will see more. I think President Xi today announced that China would start to phase out coal use, in the next decade. I think that's crucial because that is the key driver of China's emissions. So hopefully we will see more there.
Joanna Lewis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. More chips, please. Jaguar Land Rover becomes the latest car producer to be hit by the semiconductor shortage.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents.
a new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Jaguar Land Rover has hit the brakes at 2 of its main factories in the United Kingdom because of a shortage of semiconductor chips. The company says production will stop for at least a week as it tries to work with suppliers. Car makers across the world have lost billions of dollars in revenue as COVID-19 disrupts the global supply chain of chips. In China, however, Jaguar Land Rover has no plans to halt production. Sales are up and they're expected to grow this year. Even so, the company says there are still challenges ahead.
It is difficult, also looking forward into the 21, because the world is still fighting against COVID. We're still suffering geopolitical difficult environment. And you also know there are some constraints in supplies, like in the chip industry as well. So it will be uncertain, but I'm so confident. If we could be successful last year, we will be successful this year as well.
Meanwhile, several automakers have had to adjust their operations to stay in business. Daimler plans to cut the working hours of up to 18,500 employees and suspend production at 2 plants in Germany. Now, newly formed Stellantis, that's the merger between Fiat Chrysler and PSA Group, says it will replace digital speedometers, which require the chip, with more old-fashioned analog ones in one of its Peugeot models. And Hyundai has temporarily halted production at its factory in South Korea because of the chip shortage.
Well, David Bailey is Professor of Business Economics at the University of Birmingham. He explained why these chips are so important to the global marketplace.
Semiconductors are chips, microchips, that go into increasingly everything. So we talk about the Internet of Things, you know, your TV, your computer, your gaming console, increasingly your refrigerator has a microchip. Cars have lots of microchips. They are the electronic brains of the car. And part of the problem is that during the coronavirus shutdown, car companies shut down production. They weren't ordering chips. Chip makers started to direct their supplies to everything else that needed them, and we're using lots more of them. So car companies came back at the back of the queue and can't get enough chips to make their cars. So unless they've got them, they can't make as many cars as they want to, and increasingly they have to prioritize the cars on which they make most profit in order to use the chips as efficiently as possible.
How long is this going to go on for?
I think that's the $64 billion question. We don't know the answer to it. So these are indefinite stoppages. In the case of Jaguar Land Rover, they've not put a time on it. And the longer it goes on, the bigger the impact is likely to be on sales and therefore the bottom line. We don't know, for example, when in the case of Jaguar Land Rover, they have to seek state support, for example, in case of a kind of a furlough scheme for their workers. The issue really is there's not enough capacity in the chip-making industry, and you can't resolve that very quickly.
Are car makers sitting in their boardrooms asking, look, we need to do things very, very differently, and what are the implications of those conversations?
I think they are in many ways. Increasingly, I think what you're seeing is, for years we've spoken about the need for scale. That is still hugely important for many players, but increasingly they're thinking maybe we shouldn't be going for growth at all costs. We need to think about how we make a profit on every vehicle that they sell, and also look at the resilience of their supply chains. Now, that could come down to chips. In the future, there's going to be huge issues about batteries and the rare materials that go into them. And there's going to be geopolitical issues there as well. So the EU has said, for example, after 2026, cars made in the EU or the UK have to have batteries made in the EU to avoid tariffs. So there's a big gearing up of battery making, for example, in Europe. That's going to increase demand for those rare materials. So this is only going to get more difficult going forward.
China has been the great hope of particularly European car makers through the pandemic. Presumably, lots of people around the world are putting orders in for cars that may not be delivered anytime soon.
Yes, that's absolutely right. China, in a sense, because it got the virus under control quickly and their economy bounced back, the car market there has become the biggest in the world by a long way. So, at the risk of kind of mangling an old phrase, when the Chinese economy sneezes, the world's car industry now gets a cold. It is that important. So what happens in China, hugely important for the car industry around the world. The other thing in China is that the government is going electric in a very big way. It recognizes that Chinese engines don't really compete very well. So it's basically saying, let's go electric. It also wants to reduce dependence on fossil fuels and also improve air quality in cities. So China is increasingly setting the global standard for how cheaply you can make an electric vehicle, and we'll see increasing numbers of Chinese vehicles on our roads around the world. That's also going to increase demand for chips and batteries and rare materials. So, the Western companies are going to struggle with that in a big way.
China's electric vehicle market is speeding up again after a pandemic slump. First quarter sales more than doubled from a year ago. Last month, new energy vehicles accounted for 10% of all passenger cars sold, a record high. CGTN's Huang Fei reports.
Hands off the wheel on a busy road. This is touted as the first electric car to have a full suite of Huawei's latest autonomous driving features. Electric car maker Arcfox has partnered with the telecoms giant to build this luxury sedan, which it hopes will rival Tesla's in the world's biggest vehicle market.
Our joint product with Huawei is the world's first autonomous car to use 396-baud LiDAR sensors. It's a whole new level of precision, reaction speed and detection of real road scenarios. It also uses high-precision maps, in which Huawei is a leader.
Industry officials say the recent robust sales show the car makers' efforts to innovate are paying off. Consumers are also taking advantage of government subsidies, which will be phased out over 2 years. Beijing resident Mr. Liang bought his electric SUV 6 months ago and says the cost of keeping an EV is a tenth of what owning a petrol car would be.
I save about 1,000 yuan every month in fuel. In terms of range, I can travel to my in-laws' place 300 kilometers away, take it on highways and back and still have power. Charging is very convenient too, with more battery recharging facilities available.
There's a growing appetite for more expensive models that don't qualify for government subsidies. Tesla raised the prices for its Model Y SUVs last month after strong sales in China. Arcfox said they also sold more than 1,000 new premium cars in just 2 days at the Shanghai Auto Show.
This prototype may not be for sale, but it's an idea of what the future of green cars could look like. Many Chinese brands are coming up with attractive high-end models targeting the young, hip, and tech-savvy who have a sizable income. A survey by J.D. Power says younger consumers are more likely to buy local products. 60% of those born after 1995 say they prefer domestic brands.
But China doesn't just represent huge buying power in the new energy sector. Experts say it's a crucial link in the green supply chain, helping a global transition to a low-carbon future.
In the new energy sector, China leads. We produce 80% of all solar panels and also the most wind power generators in the world. If the US and Europe want to reach their emission targets, they will need China's technology.
Domestic EV makers are confident their products will spur overseas demand, with NIO and Arcfox both announcing plans to enter Europe and the United States. As for Mr. Liang, he's looking forward to the day he can take a nap in his car, as it drives itself through Beijing's rush hour traffic. Huang Fei, CGTN, Beijing.
Credit Suisse has asked investors for almost $2 billion after suffering what the chief executive called unacceptable losses. The Swiss banking giant was forced to write off billions of dollars following the collapse of the US investment fund, Archegos, and British firm Greensill. The financial regulator is investigating how the bank handled the risks. Credit Suisse reported a pre-tax loss of $827 million for the first quarter, with shares falling more than 5%.
Ireland says it's committed to reaching global agreement on corporation tax, but says any deal must work for small countries and allow for tax competition. The OECD, which has been coordinating talks among 140 countries, says it expects an agreement by October. Ireland and other countries hosting multinational corporations attracted by low tax rates have been accused of profit shifting.
The European Central Bank will keep its monetary policy unchanged and continue providing stimulus to Eurozone economies as they battle with the pandemic. The bank's president, Christine Lagarde, says the economy is on crutches and in need of support from both the central bank and national government spending.
British businessman Sir James Dyson has moved his residency back to the UK after 2 years based in Singapore. The Brexit supporter was accused of hypocrisy at the time. However, a spokesman for his company says Dyson's headquarters will remain in Singapore. This comes after revelations that the billionaire messaged Prime Minister Boris Johnson over tax issues at the start of the pandemic.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're in Minneapolis, where another black man will be buried after being shot by a white police officer.
More than 100,000 people in Italy have now died from COVID-19.
The vaccination programme offers some hope for the future, but intensive care units are near capacity.
The Spanish government is hoping to vaccinate over 1 million people by next month.
Living in Germany are struggling with their mental health.
Hungary is supplementing the EU's vaccine rollout, buying doses from Russia and China to speed up the process.
4 million people have tested positive in France.
After a grim winter, the promise of a spring bloom that could mean freedom for millions.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas. Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliette Mann. Our top stories. The United States promises to cut carbon emissions faster, putting pressure on other countries as world leaders begin a climate summit.
And Jaguar Land Rover slams on the brakes, the latest car maker to pause production amid a global shortage of semiconductor chips. India is witnessing a second wave of the COVID pandemic, with the country reporting a record number of cases and daily deaths.
As infections surge, the health infrastructure has collapsed, and patients are facing a shortage of oxygen, hospital beds and ventilators. Ravinder Bawa reports from Delhi.
In the capital city, the police has a new responsibility as India reels under second wave of COVID-19 pandemic. The police has created green corridors for tankers carrying liquid oxygen for hospitals treating COVID patients. The city hospitals have been facing immense shortage since Wednesday afternoon. Partial supplies resumed, but hospitals say it is just a temporary fix.
We have little breathing space with our oxygen cylinder supplies. There are 200 coronavirus patients in our hospital, so the consumption is very high. We need to refill the liquid oxygen plant again. It's very crucial because this will help us in the long run.
Many patients are reaching hospitals gasping for breath. Many are losing their lives as they are turned away from the hospitals due to lack of oxygen beds. The fear of running out of breath is forcing relatives to loot oxygen cylinders from hospital storerooms for their loved ones.
As soon as a truck with oxygen cylinders arrived, some people picked them up from a storeroom and kept them by the bedsides of patients. It's not that there is a shortage of oxygen at the hospital, the supply is continuous.
As the demand for oxygen goes through the roof, the centre has decided to float a tender for importing 50,000 metric tons of medical oxygen.
Companies from different countries have expressed their interest, and we are evaluating them. The contracts will be produced soon, and it will take about 3 weeks for them to dispatch oxygen supplies.
After the last peak, the government sanctioned 162 oxygen generation plants, of which only 33 have been installed so far. Had the government ensured these plants were operational by now, many would not have breathed their last breaths. Ravinder Bawa, CGTN, Delhi.
Meanwhile, the EU is set to sue AstraZeneca over its failure to deliver sufficient coronavirus vaccine doses. AstraZeneca had promised 100 million doses to the EU in its contract, but by March it only delivered 30 million, contributing to major delays in the rollout. Most member states support the legal action, although Germany and France have asked for more time to consider the issue.
Germany's lockdown limbo has come to an end. Both houses of parliament have passed new pandemic laws that will put the power to impose restrictions in the hands of Chancellor Angela Merkel. With the number of COVID cases still stubbornly high, the few freedoms Germans have won back in recent weeks are expected to disappear. Ryan Thompson reports from Frankfurt.
It was weeks in the making, but tough new legislation to control Germany's third wave of the pandemic is now in the books. The upper house of parliament approved the Infection Protection Act Thursday, and because most parts of the nation have seen coronavirus cases reach critical levels, the effect will be immediate in most places.
Diese dritte Welle lässt sich nicht wegtesten.
This third wave cannot be tested away. There's no digital tool to do away with it, and it cannot be vaccinated against. There is only one method that has been tried and tested and is effective. It is banal, but successful: reducing contacts.
The law keeps cities in lockdown if they record more than 100 infections per 100,000 residents over the course of a week. A nighttime curfew will be added from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and all non-essential shops will be closed. Despite most Germans saying the new measures are needed, a small faction is strongly opposed. Protests outside the parliament have turned violent, and after 6 months of a non-stop lockdown, opponents of the law say enough is enough. A slow vaccination campaign, like the one seen in other EU countries, has not helped keep the third wave at bay. Only 20% of the population has been offered at least one dose of a vaccine, though officials have promised everyone will be eligible by June.
And it increasingly looks like Russia's Sputnik V vaccine will play a part in those efforts. Germany has been pushing hard for it, But the vaccine has not yet been approved by European drug regulators. One German premier says that once it does get the green light from the EMA, Germany is ready to purchase 30 million doses to be delivered as soon as June and until August. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
The funeral of a 20-year-old black man shot and killed by a white female police officer is taking place in the U.S. city of Minneapolis. Daunte Wright died on the 11th of April after the officer allegedly drew her handgun instead of a taser by accident. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Jim Spellman, who's at the church in Minneapolis. Jim, the Wright family's lawyer has described the killing as an intentional, deliberate and unlawful use of force. What's the mood there?
Well, you know, we're seeing mourners file in here all morning. And, of course, it's a somber occasion, but it's also an opportunity to celebrate the life of Daunte Wright and acknowledge that his death, as with the death of George Floyd, is now part of this much larger movement for criminal justice reform here in the United States. The wake public viewing was yesterday. Civil rights advocate Al Sharpton spoke then, and he will eulogize Daunte Wright today. We'll also hear from family members and other civil rights leaders. Yesterday, Al Sharpton noted that it was the wedding anniversary of Daunte Wright's parents, Katie and Aubrey Wright, and he said the only suitable gift for them is justice for Daunte Wright. Daunte Wright was killed 11 days ago by a Brooklyn Center, Minnesota police officer, a 26-year veteran. It appears that she potentially mistook her taser for her gun when she shot him during a traffic stop. She's been charged with second-degree manslaughter. The family would like to see more serious charges filed in that case. Jamie?
This is such a sensitive and difficult time for that community, given just a couple of days ago a white police officer was found guilty of killing George Floyd.
Yeah, and you know, we're starting to see the mood change a lot here in Minnesota. To a degree, they're sort of defortifying the city. We're seeing plywood come down off of many of the businesses, and the protests have certainly died down. Tuesday was a celebration. Today is about mourning Daunte Wright. And then it's on to the bigger, more difficult work of trying to create true change and be sure that their deaths did not happen in vain. That's what we're hearing repeatedly from advocates here. And they say, though, what's really changed with the 3 guilty verdicts against Derek Chauvin is the sense that at least accountability is possible. And they say accountability is key to creating larger change. Jamie?
Jim Spellman in the United States. Thank you very much.
The U.S. Senate committee has overwhelmingly backed a bill targeting China over a range of issues, including human rights and economic competition. Separately, a group of Senate and House of Representatives lawmakers introduced another act calling for $100 billion for tech research. Both are aimed at countering China's international influence. CGTN's Nathan King explains.
There's a big debate here in Washington and in Beijing and around the world about whether the US and China are on the brink or in a Cold War. And when the history of these times is written, it may be the Strategic Competition Act, just passed out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee here of 2021, that may signal the start of that Cold War. It calls for a whole government approach to China on every level of a new era of what it calls strategic competition. Let's listen to the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez.
China today is challenging the United States, destabilizing the international community across every dimension of power, political, diplomatic, economic, innovation, military, even cultural, and with an alternative and deeply disturbing model for global governance. So this is a challenge of unprecedented scope, scale, and urgency, and one that demands a policy and strategy that is genuinely competitive.
Now, as the Democrat senator said there, it was a bipartisan vote out of committee. It's going to have to be in the full Senate and go to President Biden's desk soon, we understand. Now, what does it do? Essentially, it calls on the military in the Indo-Pacific to have more assets, to be more forward-facing, right up to China, as you know, as it is in Japan, with the freedom and also the freedom of navigation exercises, so-called, in the South China Sea. It also calls for all government departments to appoint people to basically focus on strategic competition with China. That's all government departments, those domestic and international. Quite incredible. It focuses on economics, changing supply chains. It also focuses on competing with China at the international level in organisations like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. Quite an incredible reach. And it's not just this bill either. There's others under consideration as well. The China censorship bill, which will focus on universities having to say how much money they receive from China, which is the biggest investor in universities, although Britain and Canada and Saudi Arabia are up there with them. And also, there are other bills basically putting American money in the industries of tomorrow that they know that China is leading on at the moment. We're talking about 5G, we're talking about lithium batteries for electric cars, we're talking about artificial intelligence. Essentially, what this bill and others are doing is saying, China, we know you're succeeding in modernizing very rapidly, and we see that as a strategic threat. The one exception, of course, is cooperation on climate change. Nathan King, CGTN, just outside the US Capitol.
China has censured Australia after it decided to withdraw from 2 deals under the Belt and Road Initiative. The agreements were signed between Beijing and Australia's Victoria State. Canberra says the deals are no longer in line with foreign policy, but Beijing has described it as another move from Australia to further damage bilateral ties.
The Australian federal government's decision to veto the Belt and Road Agreement between the Victoria government and China is unreasonable and reckless and disrupts exchange and cooperation. China expresses its strong dissatisfaction and staunch opposition to this. We urge Australia to abandon the Cold War mentality and ideological prejudice, view China-Australia cooperation objectively and rationally, and stop going further down the wrong path and making matters worse.
Greek officials say they want to boost investment from China to help the country's economy recover from the pandemic. An online summit brought together businesses from the 2 countries as Athens looks to play a bigger role in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Naweed Jabakal reports.
Stretching across the Mediterranean Sea, Greece's strategic location has long made it a gateway into Europe. Today, it's the Chinese that are driving a lot of investment here, like at Athens' Piraeus port, one of the flagship projects in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Officials on both sides say they're keen to further boost trade ties.
What we want to do is to, after this pandemic COVID-19 crisis, to re-establish the strong relationship we had all this previous year with China, and our efforts to stimulate the investment from China in Greece and the investment from China to European Union through Greece.
As a member of the European Union, Greece's budding relationship with China comes against the backdrop of hardening attitudes to Chinese investment in other parts of Europe. The Chinese Chamber of Commerce in the EU represents almost 1,000 businesses in the bloc. Many of them are taking a longer-term approach.
Over the past 2 decades, Greece has been a stable investment destination for Chinese investors. Chinese investment in Greece has been increasing steadily, particularly concentrated in key sectors such as shipping, telecommunications, photovoltaics.
Business isn't all one way. Some are heading in the opposite direction. This Greek olive oil producer has been exporting goods to China for nearly 15 years now and is still seeing strong growth.
In 2020, the olive oil import from Europe to China was decreased by 27%. Due to COVID, the consumption at home dropped, and of course in the restaurants, but still as a company we managed to increase our exports 50%.
According to Chinese government data, bilateral trade was worth around $8.5 billion in 2019, rising almost 20% on the previous year. And by last June, Chinese foreign direct investment in the country was worth $240 million.
Belt and Road Initiative will help Greece to strengthen its position as a logistics, shipping and energy hub. The fact that both governments have been cooperating the past 10-15 years has played a very important role, very significant role in the strengthening of the relations.
Things did slow down in 2020 as global trade was hit by the coronavirus. This year, the two sides are looking to boost tourism and cultural ties at a time when travel remains restricted. But as Greece eyes yet another economic recovery, it's firmly looking east. Noe Jabakil, CGTN.
China and Germany have both agreed to remain economically engaged following a virtual meeting between the foreign ministers. China's Wang Yi said that major economies should not disengage, while his counterpart Heiko Maas says strong communication with Beijing must be maintained despite differences. Both agreed they have common interests in maintaining stability in supply chains and cooperation in the automotive and other industries.
Moscow has ordered its troops to withdraw from the border near Ukraine and Crimea, with the defence minister saying a snap check had been achieved. The European Union estimated that more than 100,000 Russian soldiers had amassed in the area. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has welcomed the move, which he says proportionately reduces tension, but added Kiev will remain vigilant.
An Albanian man suspected of supplying weapons to Mohamed Lahuej Bouhelel, who'd killed 86 people in the French city of Nice in 2016, has been arrested in Italy. Endri Eliza was seized after Paris issued a European arrest warrant. Bouhelel, a Tunisian citizen, was shot dead by the police after he drove a truck through a crowd of people celebrating the National Bastille Day holiday.
Indonesia's president has ordered every effort to be made to find a missing submarine with 53 crew members on board. The vessel disappeared during a torpedo drill on Wednesday. Military and naval officers will join the search, which has become a race against time, with the submarine's oxygen supply expected to run out on Saturday. Neighbouring Malaysia and Australia have also offered help.
China says none of its citizens were involved in Wednesday's bomb attack on a hotel in the Pakistani city of Quetta. A car bomb killed 4 people at the Serena Hotel, while more than a dozen were injured. China's ambassador to Pakistan, who was staying at the hotel with a Chinese delegation, was not present at the time. The Pakistan Taliban have claimed responsibility.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why changing the way we heat our homes could be central in the fight against climate change.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. How green is your boiler? The UK has committed to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by almost 80% by 2035. But forget recycling, composting and switching your diesel car to electric. A huge amount of UK CO2 emissions comes from heating our homes. So if we're serious about tackling climate change, perhaps we should take a closer look at our domestic appliances.
If you live in a house like this, you're likely part of the problem.
Yeah, a lot of people have no idea. They think about their flying, maybe they're eating meat, maybe they think about their car, but very few people think about emissions from their home.
85% of UK homes are run on gas boilers, contributing around 15% to the total CO2 emissions generated in the UK. The government set a target of 600,000 electric heat pumps to be installed each year by 2028. But at the current rate, it will take at least 700 years to decarbonise the housing stock and get to net zero emissions.
You know, the UK has some of the leakiest homes in Europe, very inefficient, and reducing consumption by insulating buildings, installing better windows. That's the first step. And then to take advantage of the much greener electricity that we have in the UK, which means to switch from currently mainly using gas boilers to a technology called heat pumps.
For decades, Sweden, Norway and Finland have been electrifying their heating using renewable energy which has lower emissions. But replacing gas boilers with electric is an enormous and expensive task. Plus, you need larger radiators and pipes. So some manufacturers have hit on hydrogen for a cleaner, greener home heating future.
We have this wonderful gas infrastructure in the UK. There's about 150,000 miles of gas pipework zigzagging its way under the roads and the cul-de-sacs of the country. So for existing homes to remove the existing boiler and fit a hydrogen boiler instead, that's no disruption for the homeowner. And from a price perspective, the cost, we believe, of a hydrogen boiler when selling on the same scale that natural gas boilers do will be more or less the same.
Gas boilers in new build homes in the UK will be banned by 2025 and could be phased out entirely by the mid-2030s. But a greener replacement unit could run into the thousands of dollars when this gas boiler works just fine, quite like the 23 million others up and down the country.
Ask people how likely they're going to be to switch to low carbon heating the next time they change their boiler. Very few people indeed are prepared to make that change. So we have a huge mountain to climb, but the debate is picking up, the next frontier of decarbonising the economy.
But while policymakers' new climate targets spell out why and when they want change, they're still hazy on how, and if the taxpayer, consumer or industry is going to pay for it. Juliette Mann, CGTN, London.
A big change in the way we all live our lives will be crucial in moving the world to greener energy. Clementine Cowton is from Octopus Energy in the UK, and she told me the change is already well underway.
The level of sort of lifestyle change that will be needed is relatively minimal. You know, the products that we will be bringing to market or that are already in place, such as electric vehicles or heat pumps, are going to be as good, if not better, more comfortable, more enjoyable for customers to use. So it's not as if you have to kind of preach to people in order for them to be able to enjoy the benefits of this revolution.
And let's look at European markets. I mean, who's leading the way? Who's trailing miserably?
I mean, I think I'd be pretty comfortable in saying Britain is leading the way. We are have an enormously ambitious, if realistic, carbon target, and we've also been incredibly successful in absorbing renewable power onto our grid. So we're in a really fantastic position to lead the world.
And who should pay for it? Because there's this conundrum, isn't there? There's no real business plan out there. Should it be consumers? Should it be taxpayers? Or should it be industry?
I think that question presupposes the idea that it will be expensive. In fact, if we do it right, moving to a cleaner, greener world should be cheaper than the status quo. I think Britain's economy has grown by, I believe, 75% while reducing its emissions by 40% over the last 30 years. That just goes to show that a green revolution can be can lead to a more efficient and lower cost economy. You know, the electrons that come from the wind and the sun are free. Once you've paid for the kit, you've then got a zero marginal cost power. That means that as long as we can match the demand, as long as we can have people using energy at times when those assets are generating, we can get incredibly cheap power on our grid, and that that basically means it pays out rather than it being a question of who pays.
Now, Japanese corporate culture is well known for its after-work parties, but the pandemic has put them on hold for more than a year, dealing a heavy blow to the hospitality industry. One company, though, has been trying to adapt. Phoebe Amoroso reports.
Since the coronavirus pandemic arrived in Japan last year, office parties have moved online, and party food comes in these boxes.
Many of our customers use our service for welcome parties, end of year or general get-togethers. Some also order custom food boxes, adding their company logo or even requesting an original bowl to be included in the box.
The hospitality industry in Japan has taken a heavy blow. Restaurant sales fell a record 15.1% year-on-year in 2020, according to the Japan Food Service Association. Many businesses have focused on takeout and delivery. Others have closed down. Before the pandemic, this company was running a corporate catering service that provided companies with meals to facilitate employee communication. But most large events were cancelled and their sales were almost completely wiped out. Looking for inspiration, they saw how work was moving online, and so they came up with a solution. This food box is delivered directly to their customers' homes. It contains a selection of snacks and dishes, and it even comes with a choice of alcoholic or non-alcoholic drinks. The company says it can prepare and deliver meals for up to 20,000 people across the country to enjoy exactly the same thing at the same time.
With other services like Uber Eats, there is a difference between regions. With people working remotely and moving back to their hometowns, eating the same food and sharing the same experiences increases their sense of unity and belonging.
Demand for niche catering has taken off in the past year. Nompi says it counts several major corporations among its clients, with many IT companies in particular using its services. These businesses are ordering food boxes to bring together their different teams spread out across nationwide branches.
Working from home might be here to stay. A recent Kyodo News survey of 110 large Japanese corporations found that over 2/3 are planning to maintain or expand levels of remote work.
With Japan facing a fourth wave of coronavirus infections, more catering businesses are trying to reach people, and more corporations are hoping they can make online teamwork taste better. Phoebe Amoroso, CGTN, Tokyo.
And finally, life on Mars could be closer to becoming reality. The red planet's atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide, but NASA's Perseverance rover has successfully converted CO2 into oxygen. The conversion was done on the Martian surface using an instrument known as MOXIE, which managed to produce 5 grams, the equivalent of 10 minutes of breathable oxygen. NASA describes the experiment as modest, but one that could eventually see human life on Mars.
Back on Earth, the headlines again. The United States promises to cut carbon emissions faster, putting pressure on other countries as world leaders begin a 2-day climate summit.
Jaguar Land Rover slams on the brakes, the latest car maker to pause production amid a global shortage of semiconductor chips.
And India sees the world's highest daily number of new coronavirus cases, with hospitals overwhelmed and oxygen running out.
Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as cgtn.com and the CGTN app. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.